All right, I'm Will Long. You can find me on Twitter at caresci, on Drupal.org also. You can find the things that I work on there. I've got a website, a blog that's maintained just enough to be called a blog. My experience, I've been working with Drupal, particularly developing custom backend type solutions for about 4 or 5 years now, full time. Before that, working with PHP, various different PHP systems, and then before that, even just coding all the time. So, I've got a lot of coding experience, particularly with Drupal for the last 4 or 5 years, pretty heavily.
I'm Eric Kirstner. I've been working with content management systems since 1998. I actually started with Java and worked with Java basically for 12 years, and then got into working with Drupal on the side in 2006. It was Drupal 5.1 at the time. And then, fortunately, a couple years ago, I started working at Breakthrough Technologies and got the opportunity to work with Drupal full-time, and Breakthrough is kind enough to sponsor this gold sponsor and allow me to spend more time with the Drupal community.
All right, just some little bit of bookkeeping about the presentation, what we're going to be doing. So the objectives, this is the material we're hoping to cover in depth enough that you'll be able to take away some of these points, particularly what is a framework in an app. Also explain where Drupal kind of is on the spectrum, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that Drupal does well and things you can use that are already there to make it a good web framework to build your app on. In addition to this is our agenda. Once again, talk about the apps and frameworks, and then what is Drupal, and then we're going to talk about the parts that make Drupal work as a framework.
So what is a web application? When I hear the word framework, usually I think of MVC. I think a lot of people will think of MVC as a way to define how you're going to build your web application. And is Drupal an MVC, or is it a CMS? And I don't want to go too far yet.
But in particularly, we're just kind of defining our terminology right now. A web app is kind of your final thing. Like it is the end result of what you're going for. It's got a distinct set of features.
Right.
It is the thing you're building.
So it's different to many different people, right? So your web application could be really just a static website where you blog, and to one person, they're just editing content. I've worked on sites where it's a learning management system, so it's training people and providing certifications. So to that end, it's a whole different type of web application. So it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So basically, your web app is your end product, what you intend to build.
And then kind of at the other end of that spectrum, we've got the framework. See right now, this slide has got a toolbox. That's exactly what a framework is. A framework it's nothing. It's a bunch of pieces, a bunch of components that, in the end, you will create some type of end product, some type of app, some type of something. Whether it's a website, whether it's a storage backend for something else, an app on phone, whatever. But the app is going to be your final product. Framework is your toolbox of tools. All right, so this is something that's been heavily covered in a lot of sessions, a lot of blog posts. The community has a lot of opinions on things like this. So we're going to cover some stuff that our friends have to say, and I'm pretty sure you're familiar with both of these guys. They've both done sessions and blog posts and covering this topic, and we're going to use some of the stuff that they say and kind of back that up with some of our own thoughts on what they have to say.
So one thing, this is Jeff Eaton. He did a talk about this at DrupalCon London 2011. And you need to find your product as a thing that helps you do something, which is basically what we talked about as the web application, the end goal that lets you do something. And the framework is the thing that helps you make that product. So basically, you're using Drupal to build an end product. It also seems that, at least during the keynote, Jeff talked a lot about the CMS components and how radically all the improvements for Drupal 8 and how great it looks. Which is a good point because in Drupal 7, you don't just download Drupal 7 and that's it. You also download contributed modules like views, views UI, a lot of the fields that you're going to use. If you're lucky, not a WYGIWYG, but sometimes a WYSIWYG, use bulk operations. And these are just common contributing modules that you always build. So Drupal is pretty bare, and then you need these contributing modules to really start making a website. And now with, Ethan was talking about Drupal 8 and how it has all these things in core, how core, it does it better with less modules. So that's really the CMS part of Drupal.
So we've kind of covered what a framework
Maybe we
is.
forgot what Krell said.
Oh, and we tucked that in later.
Okay.
We changed the order of the slides a little bit since we last went through this. But so we're going to talk about where does Drupal fit in, and Larry is included, don't worry. So we've kind of got the spectrum from a framework on one side and app on the other side. What is Drupal? Where does it live in there? And the answer is going to be really squishy, but we'll get there. So this is Larry Garfield. He had a blog post. He works at Palantir, so it's on their website. So he's basically saying Drupal is a tool for building a content management system. So you can install Drupal, turn a couple things on, and start writing content. So I mean, in one term, that is a product. Like you turn it on and go. But on the other hand, there's additional things you may want to do to it. Particularly if you're going to be doing some custom functionality, developing any range of anything that's not already there, that's when you start walking on to the framework type of spectrum. You start stepping closer to using Drupal as a framework as opposed to Drupal as the product. This is taken once again from Jeff Eaton's presentation he did in London. One of the lines that stuck out to me when I was watching it said, Drupal is a mutant. So is Drupal a product? Is Drupal a framework? Well, according to Jeff, it's a mutant. It's a strange combination of both. He uses the terms promwork and product to describe it. So it's a messy spot in the middle. It can be anything to a wide variety of users. So in his presentation, he covered probably 4 or 5 different users. So these were actually real-life users of Drupal who kind of represent different people from different backgrounds who would use it. So there's the cheesemaker from Geneva who has his small company website on Drupal. There's a lady that runs the NBC Universal community site. So she's not technical, but she's the product owner. So Drupal is something different to her. And there's Barack Obama, who runs WhiteHouse.gov on Drupal, and is probably very disjointed from anything to do with the website, but he's still a stakeholder in it. So to each of these different people, Drupal is something unique, whether it's a framework or an application. And then as we were talking through this, I coined the term, what you get is what you get. And then that kind of describes Drupal. In my opinion, Drupal's not a mutant. It's somewhere in the middle, so maybe to you that means mutant. But it's not. Drupal, as much as I hate to use the term, Drupal is what Drupal is. And it lives somewhere in the middle. It depends what your take is on it. But if you would like to use it as a framework, it's more than viable as a solution to do so.
Well, and we actually kind of disagree, because I think it is a mutant in the fact that it has all these CMS capabilities, but it also has these framework capabilities as well, which is why in Drupal 7 you could attach all these modules to make it a viable end product. And Larry even mentioned something called Small Core. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but there used to be an initiative to make Drupal less dependent. So basically to take away the coupling so that all the features can be more flexible and used more as a framework. And I think progress has been made on both, and that's why calling it a mutant really works for me, at least.
So I guess in terms of what Drupal is, in my estimation, the most distinct definition I can give you is Drupal is a framework with the most bare bones type of application built into it. So that's going to be your content types, your different fields you can add onto it, the pieces that are core and the pieces that are supported by core. That is a very, very simple application, but which can then itself be used as a framework to build upon.
And I think if the end product, if you didn't want a framework, if you wanted a CMS out of the box, that's where distributions would come in. Your distribution like Commerce Kickstart. If you wanted a store that's actually, if you wanted a store that had product variances, so different T-shirts and different colors, and a slideshow and a responsive theme, and when you download this distribution, then you have that right out of the box. Now, if that doesn't meet your exact use case, then maybe that's not the best idea to do.
Setting it up for you, Eric.
But really, in the end, does it matter if it's a framework or an application? No one cares. What Will said, you get what you get. Nobody cares.
So we've been kind of defining framework versus app. Hopefully that wasn't a waste of time because it doesn't matter. But the point being is Drupal can be used as an app. It can be used as a framework also. So the app, once again, is installing it, plugging it in, and away you go. The framework is, Drupal is this set of APIs. Drupal is this vast array of functionality in its code base that you can then use to power whatever further development that you're going to do.
Which I think makes for a huge advantage over just your typical framework, which is very light on purpose, so it can be flexible. But all it really provides is a routing, business logic, and presentation. Where Drupal gives you these APIs where you can do so much more.
Sure, and that leads us into the next slide of pretty much the fundamentals of what any web application is going to do. So it's taking an HTTP request, figuring out what the heck it is, setting it off to some code to do some business logic on it. The business logic can be a wide variety of things. It could be computation, it could be just querying it and re-rendering it, it could be anything. And then beyond that, it's producing a response based off of that business logic.
Well, I got in a big discussion about the type of response that Drupal actually gives us, and really Drupal 7, your response could be a string that the theming layer will present to you, or it could be this really large rentable array, which I'm not supposed to mention that. Drupal 8 is going to give you a lot more options.
Sure. So, and in terms of Drupal, the way Drupal handles this, we've got routing. So the Drupal meets all the criteria of being this web app. So it handles routing, which is done through your hook menu, where the menu items are defined. It handles the business logic. That's all the modules that provide functionality for those endpoints. So, like I said, the endpoint may be running cron. It may be rendering a node. It may be logging in a user. Those are all business logic that are provided by the module that's handling that's called after the request is routed. And then in terms of the response is what's provided at the end result of that business logic. So the business logic provides a response, and it can be a wide variety of things. Like Eric was saying, it could be a string, which represents the markup that gets injected right into the middle of your page. It could be a feed, perhaps, XML, RSS type feed, it could be JSON, but there's some API that takes that business logic and presents it back to the user in the form of a web response.
And I think the modular architecture of Drupal really does the routing part very well. Mentioned in the past, I worked with Java building a CMS, and the routing was really one big application context XML file where basically you do all of your dependency injection and define what classes get used based on what requests is being made. So the hook menu is very similar, but it adds a lot. Like it adds security, access. Yeah, you define where it goes by calling the page callback. So I think it adds a lot more than just a typical framework does.
And a lot of things the Drupal provider is very valuable in the terms of extending on to your own custom development. Eric mentioned access control on your endpoints. So a lot of the frameworks that are out there that have experience working with, particularly CodeIgniter, PHP, Symfony, stuff like that, handling access control on those as the request is routed is not fundamentally built into that stuff. Drupal, on the other hand, it is directly built into, and it's ready to go right out of the box. You can install Drupal, start writing your module, and utilize that stuff right away.
Okay, so now basically what we're talking about is what Drupal offers that a typical framework wouldn't offer you. One of its strong points, something you get right out of the box, obviously is user management. And that's huge. Why rebuild something that's already done? So right away, you're using an application where you have authentication, you have the means to reset a user password, you have the means to define who could register, if it's just an admin going to create you, or you could create your own, or if you need email verification. You could control what gets emailed to that user, to assign roles and permissions and access control, and self-serve. So these are really a lot of huge stories that are given to you right off the bat.
And then the next one that is very powerful for me. So when I start building something from scratch, two of the first things I build is, one, the ability for users to log in. And one thing that users need to log in is the form. The form API that's built into Drupal is incredibly powerful. It allows you to build complex dynamic forms with all types of validation. You can alter your forms, you can theme them, you can do whatever you can imagine just through the standard form API that's built into Drupal. You can even define your own form elements if you like. If you don't like the way a text field works, if you want to add your own twist to the text field, you can provide a new text field, name it whatever you want, give it whatever functionality you want. Maybe you want to implement some JavaScript over the top of it, do something fancy, but all that stuff is already there, ready to go. But in my estimation, the thing that is incredibly beneficial to utilizing Drupal with the form API is just the little things. So a form gets submitted, it fails validation. What's the next thing you do? You got to show it back to the user. You got to highlight what went wrong. You got to add classes around form items. So being able to dynamically generate the form with all those different variables is an incredibly powerful thing that you just get with Drupal. So if you're willing to utilize Drupal's form API, which in itself is it's a homegrown, custom-built solution, but it's also been around for a long time. It's been tested like crazy. It's been proven to be fairly secure. It's there. It works. And if somebody doesn't like the way your form works, they can write their own module to extend that again.
Yeah, the form example, they have a great example of a phone number. It adds a prefix in the country code, and it combines it all into one field. So that's a good example to look at. But I think the form API was introduced, I want to say 4.7, and I think it's really helped like Drupal in its explosion, because it's really beneficial. And when I first saw it, or had to deal with it, it was intimidating, because again, it's these huge arrays, all these properties that some were obvious and some not so much. I actually started with a module called Form Builder by QuickSketch. And what I would do is, if I ever needed a configuration screen, it was just a user interface where I could say, I need this text field, these are my options, I need this field group. And then there was an export tab that exported it into to code. So you're just copying and pasting into your module, and then you have your form. And then as you need to do more complex stuff that the form builder doesn't do, this is a good reference, the API reference. And that was a really good way, for me at least, to learn how to use forms. It also provides security, right? Because every input that you put in and submit is going through Drupal's API. So if you need checkpoint or anything like that, you know that it's going to be called for you.
And the token, or the form itself has a token, provided that it's a unique form of submission, which is also very beneficial in terms of providing some type of security that the submitted form is the same form that was rendered on your web page.
Cacheable. And I also really like the AJAX framework of the form as well. So provides two ways to use AJAX. One involves a complete bootstrap and a form rebuilding. So if you want to display some content based on previous input from the form, you could use the AJAX property, or you could use the states API that comes with Drupal, which is on the front end. So it's really like if this checkbox is checked, then show this field.
So we've covered users and forms right off the bat. Like I said, those are kind of the first two things that I would start looking at in terms of building out the fundamental pieces of any type of web application. And that is an incredible amount of work just to do that type of piece of work right there. So having all of that provided by Drupal is incredibly valuable. Like I said, it's all been tried and tested and proven to work, proven to be effective, and proven to be secure. And nobody wants to build that on their own. And I don't recommend that anybody build it on their own. Let Drupal do it for you. You can build your app in Drupal and let Drupal handle all those details, and you can get on to building your app.
Theme layer. Oh, seems to get.
But before we get into this, what's the general consensus on Drupal's current theme system? Anybody want to chime in?
Kludgy.
Eric and I were discussing this quite a bit, and as almost we were afraid to tell each other what we thought about it. And it's because we both kind of like it. And in terms of why we like it, sure, it's a little kludgy, and it is its own thing that you won't find anywhere else. But we like it because it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly flexible. It's incredibly extendable. You can override it. You can do anything that you want with it. And to kind of prove the point of that is what you're seeing here is the documentation off of api.drupal.org. So when you have a module in Drupal, anytime you want to write a markup, you should be doing it by calling the theme function and invoking a theme hook. So when you do that, that sends whatever data you give it off to the theme system. Whatever hook it was that was provided, it does whatever it needs to do, and it's going to come back with a chunk of markup. But to produce that chunk of markup that you're going to then use, this is what happens. So this is a tremendously long list, and some of the functions on there are actually invoked on every module or every theme and sub-theme that's installed or running on your site. So it goes through a lot of steps to do this, but what that actually provides you is a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of providing your own functionality, providing your own overrides on a conditional basis, things like that, to get the markup that you need out of Drupal. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Morton. He's wandering around our camping. He gave a session right before lunch. His deal is, I want to get all the divs out of Drupal. Well, you know what? You can do it right here. You've got this theme layer right in front of you. It gives you all the opportunity to do that. So whether it's invoking your own theme hook to generate your markup, or to jump in and change somebody else's markup that's already coming out of Drupal. They've already designed what they want. If you don't like what they designed, here's your chance to change it into what you want.
I think that's so powerful. Like a lot of times, the client will want you to change, say, the pager of your calendar, and you can do that without touching the module or giving a patch. All you do is look for functions that begin with the word theme, and you know that those are things that you could override. And you could also override a theme template. So if a module has a template, you can just copy that to your theme, and then Drupal will call your template instead of the module. So that's real powerful, I think. And when I look at my older Drupal sites, it's kind of embarrassing, but I have, I've modified all the node templates with these conditional statements, and my template.php is probably thousands of lines long. And then when I look at my Drupal sites now, basically my templates are left untouched. I don't touch them at all, because we could leave that to theme pre-processing and CSS.
Sure, and like I mentioned earlier, this is coming from Drupal 7's API. The big buzz is about Twig coming in Drupal 8. So Twig is a templating engine that is going to turn templates into markup, but the same fundamental stuff is still going to apply. The list is a little bit shorter, but it's the same type of functions. You've got a module that's going to invoke a theme hook. It's going to run through its system and result. It's going to run through all those pre-processed functions similar to that and put it right back into the template. And it's going to give you markup just the same as this PHP template system.
I have to say too, you mentioned Morgan, who's been talking about killing divs quite a bit.
Divitis.
Makes me a little nervous because I like the div tags. I mean, you know exactly what you're looking at. You know, I could look at the source of the page to figure out where a field is even coming from, what module it's coming from. And not that you'd ever need to, but if you wanted to target, say, the second block in the left sidebar region of a page of this node type, I mean, you could just do that in all of CSS.
So, anything else? All right. So the next kind of topic we want to come to is another piece of the functionality that Drupal provides to you, and it's the data modeling functionality. So when people are thinking about building custom things in Drupal, this is one of the fundamental pieces. Oh, I've got this system, it's got all this data. I've got to write my own tables, fill out these tables, put my own schema in, index it just how I want. It's got to be fast, it's got to be custom, it's got to be performant, it's got to be scalable. It's got to be my own thing. And you know what? We're going to talk about an alternative to that in just a moment, but it's Drupal. Drupal gives you that. Drupal gives you all the tools to do that. So invoking the right hooks, you can tell Drupal, hey, these are the tables that I want. Drupal will build your tables. Tell Drupal which columns you want to index. Drupal will index them. Down the road, you want to make changes to your table. You can invoke update hooks. Drupal will change your tables. It's all there. It's all waiting for you to use.
And you can even get away with not building your own table if you didn't want to, by taking advantage of the field system, the module.
Actually, one thing we didn't cover on this was, in particular, the second point, which was query building and segmentation. So Drupal's got functionality to insert data into the database, as well as query it back out of the database, all through its own API, which is a simplified form of the PDO library. So that handles all the segmentation of your queries. It's going to prevent you from making a lot of syntactical mistakes, so you don't have to write SQL at all. You can utilize the API. It will generate the query for you, and then you can just work with the data. So if you're building an app, building an app is not writing queries. Building an app is getting data and doing stuff with it. So forget the queries, let Drupal handle your queries. From there, you can go on building your app.
Right, and there's three ways to do that, right? There's the DB query method, which really you are writing SQL, but throwing it through Drupal's API, you know that all the segmentation is going to happen. And there's also, as mentions, DBTNG, that's using DB select, which is another way to create the database using, like I said, PDO on steroids, really. So you could query what you need without actually putting in a statement, and then entity field query, which is a fun tool we use as well.
Sure. And then the last point on the slide is talking about exposing your data to external tools. External tools is nice and vague, but what that means is views. Views is there to be used. It's incredibly powerful, and if you're not using it, you are giving up free functionality. So views itself is a query builder and then a rendering mechanism. So if you expose the data in your table, so even if you want to have this custom table, that's great. Expose the views and let views get the data out of the table for you. If you want to create a table of all your data, sales transactions, custom backend handling sales transactions, you can do that. So expose it to views. The views will list out all the transactions, all in columns. Any output available from views, but the table will be the best solution to that scenario, but views right off the bat, it's going to buy you a table, it's going to buy you quick sortable columns, it's going to buy you paging, and it's all going to be themed and ready to go. It's going to look like a table, it's going to look decent right out of the box, and if you want to customize it from there, its views, you can customize it just like any other view, powered by your own table with your own custom data. Okay.
Yeah, so I was mentioning, yeah, you could build your own table from scratch, implement the right hooks so Drupal knows about it. You could tell views about it, so you could take advantage of using the Views UI to output it the way you like. But you could also use a tool like the ECK Entity Construction Kit to add a few properties and then add your fields to whatever your object is. And I think this is huge because any application is going to need something like this for, like, for example, a relationship table where you want to reference one node to one other type of entity object. You could use a single entity to do this mapping to marry the two together. You want to talk about the formatting?
Yeah, I'll just talk about a little bit in general. In my I've never said this before, but I actually would recommend using Drupal's entity system with fields to handle pretty much any type of data storage, unless there are some very unique scenarios in terms of probably performance and scalability would be the main two. But Drupal's field system is incredibly powerful, and in my estimation, it is better than writing your own tables. So this session is kind of geared towards developers who want to write their own stuff, but at the same time, I'm in that boat. I've always been a developer and in that boat, but after using the system enough, the realizations that the field system covers pretty much all the same cases, and it's easy to use from a user standpoint with a site builder, and it's also easy to extend from a developer standpoint. So talking about extending it, we're talking about writing custom field types. So there's a wide array of field types out there. You got the core field types, we're having text, long text, Boolean, integer, lists, things like that. But in addition to that, Contrib has a fair amount of field types also. You got date and link are the two that really come to mind and get used a lot. But if you have a case that you've got field data that has its own schema that is unique to itself, you can create your own field type. And just by creating your own field type, it's exposed to everything else that any other field on your website is exposed to, particularly views integration, tokens, which if we have time, we're going to talk about a little bit later. But just all that comes with fields. So if your data is in fields, anything you do with the field, you can then do with your data. So the kind of real powerful aspects of that, in my estimation, are the formatters and widgets that you use for fields. So we're talking about exposing your own form elements a little while back when we talked about the form API. What you can also do is expose your own widgets. So if you don't like the input that a particular field type uses, you can create a whole new widget for it. Just tell it, using the form API, you tell it which pieces to put together, and the form API will handle all of that for you. Same thing when it comes to rendering it. You can provide your own formatter, click it into your display configuration. So when you just configure your display modes, tell it to use your formatter. That's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to take your formatter, which can then display the data from either your own field type or any other existing field type, however you want. So it gives you the ability to handle the rendering of it how you would like, as well as under the covers, manipulating markup to whatever your exact specification might be.
And again, these are just things that are done for you just by using Drupal. You know, if you have the need where you're building a custom table and you're using the fields in the database, not fields from Drupal, you're at a big disadvantage because you have to implement these things from scratch where Drupal already has them implemented by core developers, people probably a lot smarter than me.
Yeah. So the point being of all this is that there's not necessarily any need to re-engineer the wheel, and just by utilizing Drupal as a base framework, so much of the work that you need is done that really just gives you the warm and fuzzies. As a developer, if you're willing to embrace Drupal and work with Drupal, what it gives you so much. We've been working in it for, what, probably 10 or 12 years combined at least. And so yeah, we probably dabble in every bit of each of the APIs that are out there. But if you're willing to learn about Drupal and what it provides you, it provides you with everything you need to just start building your app.
And you know, since I've started working with Drupal full time, I feel like I've never been, sounds cheesy, happier. But you know, with Java, there's so many different tools to do the same thing. So it's really nice for me to be working with the Drupal community, who's they've already figured this out, and you know, I kind of trust them to provide the best tools and the best way to do things.
So we're actually kind of winding down our presentation right now, so that what's on the screen right now are some of the rest of the stuff, and this is still a small sample of the things that Drupal provides you. Do you want to cover any of that?
Well, I mean, security is actually a really big deal, so I hope it doesn't belittle it by having it on this list of the rest of the stuff. And we did talk briefly about taking advantage of the form APIs. So that Drupal, you know, they have a whole security team making the APIs as secure as they can. So it's real important to use the API as much as possible for things that will ever be exposed for user input.
Sure. And Eric mentioned the security team. The security team doesn't actually generally identify security issues. They act on security issues. So Drupal's got this whole community base that's out there using modules, looking at code. It's the community that finds the security issues, and it's the security team that then acts on it based on. So that's a wide user base to test your code against. Right? So another consideration is going to be caching performance. So Drupal is this big giant piece of software with all these APIs. It's got a reputation for being big, heavy, and slow. My experience with it is if you do things right, it's actually not that big and heavy. But at the same time, it's still got performance considerations built into it. So particularly caching, there's caching at all levels available in Drupal. So if you're writing code where you're generating data and you don't need to be generating it 500 times every page request, Drupal's got functionality to grab onto it throughout the course of the page request as a static variable, essentially. So if it gets called 500 times, it computes it once and gives it back to you. Outside of that, it's got the actual cache mechanism that's used in Drupal. So Drupal's got persistent cache, generally held in the database. So if you want to produce a chunk of data, whether it be markup, whether it be structured data, whether it be a string, a number, an integer, whatever, you can call cache set it in your database, and it'll be there for you page after page after page until the caches get cleared or it expires.
I feel like Drupal has made it as easy as possible. I mean, they don't even have that many caching functions. They have Drupal static, which you would use to cache some kind of heavy piece of logic that's going to be called multiple times in a page request. If you grab any Drupal static, and it only gets ran once. If it's going to be for multiple page requests, you use cache set and cache get. And that makes a huge difference. Or they're going to need to say about caching your views, and if you use panels, you could also cache your panel pages. So doing all that really makes Drupal a lot less heavy.
And even a full page type caching scenarios, it's a little bit outside the realm of Drupal, but if you're going to use an edge layer cache, Varnish, for instance, that's not necessarily Drupal doing that, but there's still a whole community of people out there who are using that technology and have expertise and experience and best practices on how to utilize something like that.
I18N, internationalization, yeah. I remember the first time I actually installed that module, and then there was 14 submodules that came with it. I'm like, oh my god, this is really, this is going to take a long time. And it does, but one thing to note that I will say about it is the documentation on Drupal 7 about internationalization is really good. And it goes through step-by-step instructions of how you want to do something like context, determine a user's language by path, provide the user object, or how you would put different language content items and relate them to each other and add them to a menu, so you have a menu that only has Spanish pages, for example, or something like that.
Sure, and even from a non-technical standpoint, just the best practices in terms of making your code translatable, wrapping into any type of strings of use, C and T, things like that. Like just that type of functionality is already there. So if you're using code that has that, any contributed stuff probably has it for the most part, right? And then if you're writing your own stuff and you wrap your stuff in it, 3 years later the client comes back and says, "Oh, we gotta whip this thing up in Spanish." Well, turn it on and start translating all your strings.
Use the T method.
We talked about views some. So once again, if you're querying your own data and turning around and writing it back out to the user, you're rebuilding views. So like you're talking about integrating your own stuff with views. One aspect that we didn't talk about was in particular some of the views plugins. So if you're utilizing views and you don't quite like what views is doing for you, you can provide your own plugins to it. Plugins to alter the queries, such as what it's filtering by or what it's ordering by, and different things like that. But it's all doable through implementing a couple hooks and providing just a little bit of code in order to manipulate what views is doing for you.
And those hooks, they're called every step of the way. So you could call it before the view is the object is called. You can call it before it was rendered. You can call it right after it was rendered, but before it displays the output. So I think there's 6 different hooks where you could hook onto the views to intercept at any point in the process.
And then I think we're just about to get into our probably past the time slot. But the last 2 are token and rules. And so if you've got some piece of functionality, I definitely always recommend integrating with token and integrating it with rules. Those are contrib modules that are widely utilized by other contrib modules. So if you're implementing them with whatever your own custom functionality is, if you're integrating with those 2 other systems, that exposes many more systems to your data. I mean, just some examples. The token module, if you're using path auto modules to write URL strings, you can use your own custom data to put it right in your URL. Kind of same thing with rules. Commerce heavily utilizes rules. So if you want something custom to happen as an order is processed, you can write a rule that gets fired off. You're actually writing a
Workflow.
I forget the exact terminology. I think it's an action. So you've got events, conditions, and actions. So if you want something to happen when other conditions are true, you can write your own action, configure it to the UI, and it happens.
And all these things make Drupal so much more than a CMS, and also more than a framework, because it provides, with these contributed modules, it really gives you the ability to make a really complicated, complex application for your user. Especially, I think, one thing we didn't throw up there was flags, the combination of rules and flags. I've used that so much to help determine a workflow for a particular use case.
So the point of that being is you got core APIs, they're wonderful. You've also got APIs in Contrib. Embrace them, utilize them, it'll pay dividends. All right, I believe that's all we have for you. So if there are any questions, if they're too technical, we'll take them offline, but if we can answer something for you, we'll try to answer it.
What is your local testing environment?
Excuse me?
What is your local testing environment?
I use MAMP. I am dabbling in the vagrant shelf, the vagrant chef realm. I don't quite have that nailed down yet. That's the next thing I want to start doing. No, so in terms of writing code, I use NetBeans.
Yeah, I'm stuck on Windows, so I use XAMPP, and I use PHP Storm.
Someone has a bigger requirements. It's absolutely wonderful. So I just thought.
And it works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, just this one. It's basically just Drupal. Just Google Drupal Maker. They have the Maker file set up for you. You just clone it, install Maker, Maker up, Maker SSH. It's
So I think the issue is there, particularly in the case that I was coming across, is that I've got a couple hosting scenarios that are already out there that have certain versions of things already installed, and using someone's recipes, they may work on whatever vagrant box they're designed to work on, but the whole point of Chef is to be able to use them on any box. So it kind of breaks down if your environment is off enough.
I saw the Bacon file. It's actually pretty simple. So it's a great place to start, right?
So you have Windows 2, and you got it working on your...
No, I use Linux.
Okay.
Someone who's like practically brand new to Drupal. I mean, I've dipped into some of the documentation about various APIs, and it's really confusing for someone to do it. So where would be the best place to start?
It depends. There's plenty of resources out there. There's blogs everywhere. In particular, there was trainings yesterday from Build a Module.
Yeah, it's in that.
Okay, that's a good place to start. I find that existing code is incredibly useful. So there's the examples project, which has a bunch of modules that implement different things. So you can see working code. It's broke down and commented. And then the actual Drupal API website, it takes a little bit of getting going to realize how hook systems work, but you can find a lot of information through API Drupal, where it looks confusing at first, but once you kind of are grasping it, it's incredibly useful.
I would say that also it depends what kind of IDE you're using, because the code prediction can go through the Drupal environment. In other words, if you set up your project properly, it will scan through and find those Drupal core functions for you. So that's a great, it's impossible to remember every core function that you might need. So tie in your IDE's code prediction to the Drupal source code.
Sure, and that's a good point. Like a lot of times when we're trying to do something that core does something similar, well, how do they do it? So I just look for the path that I need, find the menu, and see what method's being called, and just follow logic from there.
But in terms of the IDE, some IDEs will actually display documentation on the function that you're calling. So I think it was less widespread in Drupal 6, especially in Contrib, but pretty much all of Drupal 7 and all the widely used Contrib stuff has commenting right in the code, and the IDEs can find that. So you start typing a function name, it will pull up the whole block and display it to you, and it'll also give you the footprint of the function, so the name plus all the variables are already ready to go.
I think that being new to Drupal, one of the hardest things that you just get from experience is knowing what hook methods are out there that you can call and stuff. So api.drupal.org is a good place to look. Just type in hook and you'll see some of the hooks that are available.
Sorry, one more. The second kind of follow-up question to that is there a resource to kind of dissect a lot of these arrays that just get passed around in a lot of the pre-processed functions and stuff? There's a lot of times I'm trying to find out certain values within certain arrays, and outside of just doing DSM, printr, I'm having it there.
I think that's a pretty standard way to do it. So if you're using VSM, it's in a big Frumo thing you click into. It's either one of the later versions or there's an extension to it that will actually, if you double click, it'll give you the whole path to the variable you're getting at. So in terms of the arrays, that's kind of semi-structured data. So it's structured in terms that it's an array, it's keys and values, but it's very flexible at the same time. It's just a bunch of stuff. In terms of pre-processed functions, a lot of the variables that are in that array aren't necessarily used. You'd have to actually trace it back to the template and see what's used where. So there's the pre-process, and then there's process also. So if something's not there in pre-process, look for it in process. If it's in process, it may be ready to go, and you have to manipulate a little more.
It also depends what kind of array. Right? It could be a configuration array from a contributed module, in which case I think you just have to look at the code of the module to see what they're doing with the config. If it's a renderable array, then I go to api.drupal.org and say it's a table. I would look for theme_table and see what properties of the array it's looking for.
Is it possible to set up something like Xdebug?
Yes.
Where you can actually,
People do it all the time. Larry Garfield helped me set it up at a sprint a couple years ago, and it's only actually needed in a couple scenarios, but usually DSM and/or doing like a print art or watchdog covers pretty much any case that I come across.
Okay. I have XDebug set up.
I've never been able to.
And with PHP Storm, it's real easy. You just put your breakpoint in 0 configuration. So as long as you get a browser extension that says turn on XDebug and you have a listener on your IDE, and it just stops at your breakpoint. XAMPP has the XDebug version for you. So basically all you do is go in INI and uncomment it out, and then it's available to you. And you could also use profiling that way too. You could turn on profiling. On a Windows machine, that's a little bit harder because there's no tools to read the profiling output. But I discovered that PHP Storm could actually do that fairly recently.
There, give us the hook. But like I said, if anybody's got any questions, we'll be wandering around this afternoon, things like that. You can tweet at me, whatever. But thanks for coming. Hope you got something useful out of it.